Freedom's greetings, Helldivers. Erevan here to give you the rundown on damage resistance in Glass Divers 2. The dust is settling on the Buff Divers patch, things are falling into place, data is being collected, and it's finally time for me to inform you all on just how big of a durability hit we've taken with what was more or less pitched as an improvement, but turned out to be the monkey's paw hard at work instead. When the big patch hit, it was announced in the notes we would be taking less headshot damage than before, but have had that extra damage spread out to our other limbs in hopes it will make damage feel less spiky. And in Arrowhead's defense, the damage is less spiky. Now, instead of random spikes of headshot damage, the damage is just always extremely high. So let's examine the numbers behind why you now feel as though your armor is made from tissue paper. First, let's examine the lowest end of the pool and how things have changed. Originally, a Helldiver in ultralight armor would experience 200% incoming headshot damage, 113% chest damage, 93% arm, and 106% leg damage, as well as 66% of explosive damage, or 44% wearing fortified armor. Basically, besides the arms, you always took slightly above the full damage of our enemies, with headshots being certain death for most attacks, considering Helldivers only have a total of 125 health, and most attacks in the game range from 40 to 100 damage, such as how Heavy Devastators deal 40 damage per hit as a baseline, and Hunters 50, meaning any mix of a headshot meant a two-shot kill here. Or well, that would be the case if it wasn't for our Lord and Savior Vitality Booster. You've probably heard of this before, as I have done my best to shout it from the rooftops on this channel, but Vitality Booster has nothing to do with limb health directly. It makes your entire Helldiver straight up take multiplicatively 20% less damage than you would otherwise, making it a must pick booster and basically the strongest in the game alongside the experimental infusion booster, offering yet another 20% damage resistance on top while the sim is active. Using this booster has always been an absolute game changer when it comes to your durability. For context, a Helldiver in ultralight armor with a vitality booster then and now takes the exact same headshot damage as a Helldiver with 150 armor not running the booster. Only 120% now after the change, and previously 160%. So let's examine what changed. This damage spread is derived from the base multipliers applied to each of your Helldiver's body parts. When Arrowhead changed the damage you received at a baseline to your limbs, it shifted every other number in the stack. Where we previously took a baseline of 200% to the head, 85% to the body, 70% to the arms, and 80% to the legs, you now take a baseline before armor of 150% to your head, 100% to your body, 85% to your arms, and 85% to your legs. Notice that your arms functionally take 17.7% more damage than they did previously, and your torso 15% more than it previously did. On average, our enemies aim and hit center mass far more often than not. Headshots are much more common while you're crouching or on low ground compared to the enemy, but typically the arms and chest are the numbers to look towards for your general durability. The head damage shifting down by effectively 25% of what it previously was is having far less general impact on your overall survivability than that big 15% chest and 17.7% arm cut. Something very noticeable with my next example. So previously, heavy padded sporting a value of 200 armor would receive only 134% damage to the head, 57% to the chest, 47% to the arms, and 53% to the legs. Keep in mind that's without Vitality Booster as well. If we take that into consideration, we get headshot damage all the way down to just 107%, 46% to the chest, 38% to the arms, and 43% to the legs. So this armor mitigated damage quite substantially if we compare it to the ultralight armor. This suit takes on average just about half the damage as a diver with 50 armor, and this is still the case. But the damage you're receiving is now generally 15% higher, as the 200 armor suit now receives 80% damage to the head while on the vitality booster, which is great and all, but your torso takes 53% damage, arms and legs taking 46% of the damage. Notice this is only 1% less than what your arms took previously without the vitality booster, which means that gap has been nearly totally bridged. My point with this is the vitality booster has become a core component to most any Helldiver squad in the game due to it being the one thing that made your Helldiver feel reasonably durable. It's not a stretch to say your average durability in a match now while running this booster is a lot like running without it before the update on the 17th, which was pretty nightmarish, especially in the lighter armors. One of the biggest issues with the headshot change, however, is that while you now receive less headshot damage overall, most attacks in the game that could one shot you to the head would also do the same if they hit you anywhere else. What was very typical, though, was taking one headshot with a follow up hit to the body, arms, or legs, which would often then drop you no matter the armor you were wearing. Shifting the damage in this way for the majority of scenarios has not actually functionally changed this at all for the better. Anything that would take you down last patch in one headshot in the majority of armor is still going to do so. Anything that eliminated you after a headshot and a body shot is still going to. But what you've been feeling since the patch more so than ever is the arm hits. As I said, the arms have changed most of all, now receiving 17.7% more damage than before. Between this and that 15% amp to your chest, it's easy to see why lots of attacks that couldn't previously take out Helldivers in any mix of two hits to the body, arms, or legs now are doing so with far more regularity than headshot kills ever occurred. Padded armor is going to be your best bet for combating these new changes and staying alive, although you can still expect to be taking more damage on average than you were last patch without it. Especially when we consider not only has our damage taken increased, but the majority of weapons and attacks the enemy has have also been increased even more significantly, with claws and laser weapons seeing a 25% boost in damage this patch, cranking every exposed moment against the bots and 2-tap instance from the bugs to lethal levels for the vast majority of our armor choices. In these last 4 days, I've been killed in ways I'd previously never even dreamed could be a fatal scenario. And that's without even touching on how just about every hit to your torso, arms, and legs now results in an immediate injury. To play devil's advocate, though, for a moment, I have to accept that our enemies did, in fact, get massive hits to their own durability, as well, coupled with the vast majority of our weapons becoming far stronger than they were previously. So, in that respect, both the Helldivers and the enemies have had very significant reductions in time to kill, making the game far more sporadic, hectic, and, objectively, far more fun, in my opinion. But there's one thing no player finds fun, and the proof of this is how the vast majority of the player base stayed extremely far away from the automatons for the first month the game was live. Rocket Devastator's rockets were dealing their damage to multiple body parts due to our Helldivers at the time lacking the explosive immune tag on their limbs. This caused us to take explosive damage repeatedly for each limb within the explosive radius, almost always killing you instantly no matter what you wore. Those of us who did play the automatons in the early days did get used to dodging the rockets and the patterns they fired them in, thanks to them having travel time, sound cues, and even a posturing stance before firing, giving you a visual cue so there was always counterplay to this. The rockets have, of course, since been nerfed many times, making rockets for the most part a non issue, especially for skilled players. In the majority of armor suits now, however, it's not an exaggeration to say when it comes to the heavy Devastator, the Rocket Strider's lasers, not even the rockets, just the lasers, or the goated Dabbot's pistol even, Helldivers are instantly dying more than ever before. But this time, unlike with the rockets, these lasers are far quicker, with perfect target tracking aimed at center mass to the point heavy Devastators will even swing their chain guns through their own body to point them instantly at their targets. Now, unlike with the rockets, there isn't a pattern to dodge these, there isn't a method to avoid the damage. And worst of all, Stagger is strong enough to cancel any attempts at utilizing a stim while taking fire, leaving Helldivers dead in nanoseconds, with the only counterplay being to have not been there in the first place. And you can argue that you can position better, you can take necessary precautions to not be caught out like this and play around cover. But I don't think it's possible to ignore that the damage we are receiving now, especially from the automaton side of things, has the least counterplay it's ever had, and is, for most people, likely a less fun experience when this occurs. Typically, when a game devolves into one shot or be one shot, you start to feel there is a lack of depth or meaning to certain statistics, in this case, armor. And certain skills are less essential than they were in this case, your movement and your footwork. If we compare some of these enemies to the Rocket Strider design for a moment, I feel you'll see what I mean. The Heavy Devastator has a rhythmic firing pattern you can play around, which is good. However, its aim tracks perfectly, and the amount of time between volleys is extremely short. When we compare this to the Rocket Devastator's lengthy firing startup animation, visual cue, sound cue, and slow projectile speed, it's easy to see why the Heavy Devastator clearly lacks the same counterplay. Arguably, an even more egregious example of this, however, is the Rocket Strider, which has no visual cue, only a sound effect from firing that much faster rocket, which deals almost 4 times the damage of Rocket Devastator rockets, mind you, with an equally high amount of pushing force. Thankfully, these rockets are at least still slow enough that they can be strafed, bet out on the fact that these also have a front laser that can bisect you with a single volley, even if you do avoid the rocket, and it's easy for me to see how a lot of folks likely find this guy a tad frustrating. So, what would I do about this? Personally, I would like to see a revert to the original damage received by our torso, arms, and legs, with the headshot damage staying the same, lower amount, as 200% from headshots was always far too much for a PvE game where the enemy has aimbot. I think many would argue headshots for a player in a PvE game is generally a bit silly, but Helldivers is a very silly game, so I feel the new 150% is about as good as it can realistically get in this department. That being said, if there were to instead only revert the torso, arms, and legs damage for medium armor and higher, I would be able to make peace with this change as a light armor user for life, as I'm then at least still actively making the decision to feel paper thin. This change has easily affected those who wear heavier armor much more than me, as while I have my mobility to keep me out of dangerous situations where I take large amounts of damage because I simply didn't play well enough. Someone in a heavier suit of armor who lacks that mobility is far more often forced to stand to take those hits, which, thanks to this change, it's gotten far more difficult for them to do so. Now, there is a very good reason the durability of heavy armor users has always increased, and that's because mobility is king in a game where the damage you receive is both extremely high and you can also be crowd controlled for tanking attacks. This, in my mind, makes any nerfs to the tankier armor's durability, which didn't feel all that tanky in the first place, pretty unjustifiable. Lastly, I want to talk a bit more about Vitality Booster. This booster is incredibly powerful, as I've said, and you likely see it in just about any Helldive or Super Helldive mission. Anytime you don't, it's entirely possible someone in that lobby just didn't know how powerful it was, as this knowledge is still only found out of game or with explicit testing. Arrowhead should have clear data on this, that this booster is taken far in excess to the others. I would propose, if this change were to stay in effect in its entirety, that Vitality Booster's current 20% damage reduction be applied to the core formula, and the booster change to do something else like, say, a modest health regeneration effect. It's not healthy for a booster to be this commonly used. It takes away from the diversity of boosters utilized, and it should be crystal clear the durability it provides is necessary from our perspective for Arrowhead. Now, unfortunately, this would mean we would lose the additional effect it has of rounding all damage below 1 received to 0, such as how heavy gas armor and vitality reduces gas damage to 0, or how chest wounds can't damage you and neither can terminate acid. Personally, I feel this would still be a worthwhile change on their part, but as for what it would change to, it's something I haven't given as much thought, nor is that the focus of the video. Hopefully, this video has cleared up why you feel flimsier than before, exactly, and what numbers are behind that. And while our durability reduction is quite substantial, I can say very confidently that this is still the healthiest and most fun state the game has ever been in. And I just wanted to get the information as well as my opinion on the topic out there. Thanks for watching till the end, and have yourselves a wonderful day. I'll see you next time.
Reloading you.
Yeah! Mess them up! My turn. They're all dead.